What came out of this breakdown hits Steelers fans in a way that feels both urgent and strangely familiar, because this time, the conversation isn't just noise, it's real. For years, Pittsburgh has stood on the foundation of stability, identity, and the unshakable presence that has defined this franchise. But now, for the first time in a long time, we're facing a moment that forces Steelers Nation to look straight into the heart of what's been building behind the scenes. This discussion isn't about disrespect, it's about reality, about the future, about the magnitude of the shoes that would need to be filled if Pittsburgh ever truly chose a new direction. So buckle up, because today, we're diving into the story shaping the present and possibly the next era of Steelers football. And before we get started, if you bleed black and gold, hit that like button and help push this video out to more members of Steelers Nation. The report doesn't waste time. It begins by acknowledging what many fans still believe will happen. The most likely scenario is that Mike Tomlin remains with the Steelers beyond 2025. The expectation is that Pittsburgh will finish with another winning record, possibly push toward the 10-win mark, and potentially even reach the playoffs. And if that happens, Tomlin isn't going anywhere unless he chooses to walk away on his own. The organization isn't planning to fire him, isn't looking to trade him, and isn't positioning itself to accept any haul of draft picks, no matter how heavy the offer might be. But the rest of the breakdown dives into something much more intriguing, something that fans have debated for years but never with a roadmap this detailed. If the time ever comes to replace Mike Tomlin, what type of leader should truly take over? The criteria presented are surprisingly simple, but brutally honest. The next head coach must be a charismatic leader of men, a standard Tomlin has set at an elite level. The next coach must also be someone capable of assembling an exceptional staff, something the report suggests has occasionally been one of Tomlin's biggest weaknesses. And third, the next coach must have a genuinely innovative mind on his side of the ball, whether offense or defense. Those three pillars eliminate a huge percentage of the noise you hear thrown around online, because most available names don't check all three boxes. According to the document, only 3 candidates actually meet the criteria fully. The first is someone Steelers fans already know well, Vikings defensive coordinator Brian Flores. And honestly, when you hear the reasoning, it makes sense on multiple levels. Flores has already been inside the Steelers building. Players like TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, and Joey Porter Jr. already know what he brings. They've seen the intensity, the charisma, the structure. The report highlights that Flores is one of the most respected defensive minds in football right now, known for his use of palms, quarters, cover zero, simulated pressures, and aggressive modern looks that mirror the direction the league is trending. And on top of that, he brings legitimate connections to young offensive minds, specifically from the Kevin O'Connell and Sean McVay coaching tree. There's also a compelling argument that Flores himself has evolved since his time in Miami, growing from the Belichick-style authoritarian figure into a more collaborative, player-focused leader after spending time in Pittsburgh and Minnesota. When you combine all of that with his instant credibility inside the locker room, the report makes it clear Flores might not just be a candidate. He might be the closest thing to a seamless cultural transition this team could ever hope for. But then the breakdown shifts to another defensive name, one with a very different personality but a similar pedigree in leadership, 49ers defensive coordinator Robert Saleh. And again, the case made here is hard to ignore. Saleh is described as a high-energy, charismatic presence who could keep the emotional heartbeat of the team intact after a Tomlin departure. His defensive approach is modern, adaptable, and proven. He has taken massive injuries in San Francisco and still fielded elite-level production. And just like Flores, he brings connections to high-level offensive coordinators, most notably Mike McDaniel, one of the most creative play callers in football. In a league where the development of the next young quarterback is often a defining factor of a franchise's future, having access to that coaching pipeline matters. It matters a lot. The third name, though, is where everything suddenly takes a dramatic turn. The report brings up former Alabama head coach Nick Saban, yes, that Nick Saban, as a real, legitimate Tier 1 candidate. And it doesn't present it as fantasy. It lays out very specific reasons this could actually be possible. Saban has instant credibility across the entire NFL, not just with players who came from Alabama but with coaches on nearly every staff, because of how many assistants he developed over the years. The organizational standard he sets is unmatched. His man-matched defensive system has influenced the modern NFL more than people realize. And according to a past report, he would be willing to take an NFL call again for the right situation. The twist? The Steelers were the team he grew up loving. He grew up near Pittsburgh. He has openly talked about that. So while the idea is bold, maybe even shocking, the argument the report makes is simple. If there's any NFL job Saban would consider as the final chapter of his legendary career, it might be this one. So now the question becomes unavoidable, and it's the same question the report asks fans directly. If the Steelers ever reached the point where they needed to turn the page, if the Tomlin era truly approached its end, which of these three names, Flores, Saleh, or Saban, actually makes the most sense for Pittsburgh's future? Picking up from that exact question, the breakdown moves deeper into the heart of the conversation, because once you sit with those three names long enough, you start to realize something important. Replacing Mike Tomlin isn't just about finding a good coach. It's about finding someone who can inherit the weight of a franchise that has built its identity on stability, discipline, and a very specific cultural standard for nearly 2 decades. And that's why the report begins to widen the scope, exploring not just the elite tier of candidates, but the layers beneath them, coaches who might not check every box, but who offer intriguing upside, new ideas, or, in some cases, a second chance at rewriting their narrative. The breakdown identifies a second-tier split into 2 categories. The first group includes the fun new hires, younger coordinators making waves across the league. Names like Clint Kubiak, Chris Shula, and Jeff Hafley, each bringing fresh schemes and impressive production despite limited experience. And while these coaches have proven themselves as strategists, Kubiak coordinating one of the most explosive offenses in Seattle, Shula building a disciplined young defense with the Rams, and Hafley giving Green Bay a tough, fast, fundamentally sound unit, the report acknowledges the one concern that looms over all of them: leadership presence. Stepping into the Steelers' locker room requires more than X's and O's. It requires the ability to command a room full of veterans accustomed to Tomlin's energy, tone, and command. Without that, even the best schematic minds could struggle. Then the analysis shifts toward the second half of Tier 2, the retreads, the experienced names who've been head coaches before and could bring something valuable even if their resumes come with baggage. Mike McCarthy appears first, a Pittsburgh native who understands the franchise's DNA and has enjoyed undeniable success in his career. But the postseason record remains a concern, and the report makes it clear that Pittsburgh cannot afford a coach who hits the same January wall that has frustrated Cowboys fans for years. Cliff Kingsbury brings a different appeal, a quarterback-friendly system that could make life easier for whoever becomes the franchise's next long-term signal caller. His offense is accessible, creative, and proven to elevate young players quickly. Brian Daboll also gets spotlighted, not because of his recent struggles but because of his proven ability to develop quarterbacks and his connection to both college and pro systems. The report argues that he might thrive again with a second opportunity in a more stable environment. Arthur Smith also gets mentioned, not as a flashy option, but as someone who already holds credibility inside the Steelers building. If Pittsburgh pursued a trade involving Tomlin, Smith's name is already circulating in league conversations as a potential candidate, especially if the offense shows promise late in the season. Even with the mixed results in Atlanta, his approach to physicality and structure aligns with Pittsburgh's identity. After that, the breakdown moves into what it calls the intriguing but unlikely category, names that spark curiosity but remain long shots for various reasons. Bill Belichick appears, of course, though the report makes it clear that such a move is improbable. John Gruden surfaces as well, though concerns about scheme evolution and fit quickly cool the idea. Young defensive minds like Jesse Minter or Aiden Durr are noted for their creativity, but again, the leadership question looms. And then there's Clayton Adams, the offensive line specialist behind the Cowboys' high-powered attack, an option who could transform the trenches but doesn't yet project as a full-scale head coach. What's striking throughout all of this is not just the sheer number of names, but the consistency of the evaluation criteria. Every candidate is tested by the same standard: leadership presence, staff-building ability, and schematic innovation. And when held against those 3 pillars, only the original 3, Brian Flores, Robert Saleh, and Nick Saban, truly stand out as complete fits. Which brings us back to the bigger point the breakdown hints at but never states outright. This is not a casual exercise. It's not a random list. It's a blueprint, one built on preparation rather than panic. It's the kind of evaluation a franchise makes quietly, behind the scenes, long before big decisions ever reach the public. And if you're part of Steelers Nation, hearing these names laid out like this forces you to think deeper about the future than ever before. It forces you to confront the reality that one day, whether next year or years from now, the Tomlin era will eventually end. The only question is how the franchise chooses to define itself afterward. So now I'll bring the same question back to you that the report ultimately asks. After seeing all of these profiles, all of these coaching paths, and all of these potential futures for Pittsburgh, which direction do you believe truly represents the next chapter of Steelers football? Picking up from that exact moment, the report shifts toward its most important and revealing layer, the underlying philosophy behind why these conversations matter right now. It isn't about choosing a name for shock value. It isn't about pushing Tomlin out the door or feeding frustration after losses. It's about something deeper, something every great franchise eventually has to face, the responsibility to prepare for the transition before the transition arrives. And that's where the narrative in the document becomes far more strategic than emotional. Because when you read through all of it carefully, you realize something. This entire breakdown is built on the understanding that Pittsburgh cannot afford to be caught off guard. The Steelers organization has spent decades building a reputation as the most stable franchise in the league. 3 head coaches in over 50 years. They don't panic, they don't lash out, and they certainly don't make franchise-defining decisions without a long-term plan. What this report shows is that, for the first time in a long while, that long-term plan is being discussed openly, with detail, with structure, and with a level of seriousness fans aren't used to seeing. And that's why the 3 Tier 1 candidates carry so much weight. When you examine them through the lens of organizational identity, they each represent a very different version of what Pittsburgh could become. Brian Flores represents continuity of culture, a coach who already understands the Steelers' DNA, who already has the respect of major leaders in the locker room, and who brings a modern, aggressive defensive identity that mirrors what this team has always valued. If the franchise wants the closest thing to keeping the soul intact while still evolving, Flores becomes the obvious successor. Robert Saleh represents a shift in energy. He's emotionally intense, extremely hands-on, and brings a coaching style rooted in passion and detail. His presence would keep the fire lit inside the building, and his connections to top-tier offensive minds would serve as the foundation for developing the next franchise quarterback. If the Steelers want a coach who can reshape the offensive philosophy while maintaining a strong defensive culture, Saleh becomes the bridge to that future. Nick Saban, though, represents something entirely different. He represents a complete recalibration of organizational standard. Bringing in Saban would be like resetting the foundation of the franchise, elevating expectations in every corner of the building, and creating a structure that mirrors the most disciplined, efficient, and demanding environments in football. It would be a dramatic shift, one built on legacy, prestige, and elite-level precision. If the Steelers want to chase the highest possible ceiling, even with the risks that come from bringing a legendary college coach into the pros, Saban becomes the boldest move the franchise could make. But the brilliance of the breakdown is that it never tries to convince you there's only one answer. Instead, it lays out the implications of each direction. A Flores hire means your locker room doesn't skip a beat. A Saleh hire means you commit fully to modernizing your offensive strategy. A Saban hire means you reset the standard for what this franchise demands from everyone, from rookies to veterans to assistants. After establishing that foundation, the document goes another layer deeper by highlighting the role of staff building. It's not enough to hire a head coach with pedigree. That coach must bring a staff that elevates the team, something that has quietly become one of the biggest criticisms within the current era. The report doesn't shy away from this. It points out that the Steelers have, at times, lagged behind other teams in the league when it comes to hiring innovative coordinators or surrounding the head coach with dynamic assistants. And that's why every candidate in the top tier is judged heavily by the offensive coordinator they're capable of bringing. Whether it's a McVay disciple, a Shanahan tree mind, or a veteran quarterback developer like Brian Daboll, the next head coach must arrive with a plan to elevate the offense immediately, not gradually, not eventually, but immediately, because that's where the league is heading. And the report makes one thing unmistakably clear: Pittsburgh cannot afford to let its next franchise quarterback navigate a system that isn't modern, flexible, and designed for growth. All of these details lead to the emotional core of the conversation, something fans rarely see spelled out this clearly. The Steelers are preparing for the future, not because they're walking away from Mike Tomlin, but because failing to prepare would betray everything this organization stands for. This isn't fear, it isn't impatience, it's responsibility, which brings us right back to where fans enter the conversation, because no matter how many names get discussed, no matter how detailed the evaluations are, no matter how far the franchise looks into the future, the heart of Steelers football has always lived with the supporters who ride every high and absorb every low. And continuing from that exact moment, The breakdown moves into its most revealing conclusion. Once you strip away the noise, once you remove the emotional reactions, once you focus purely on the structure of the franchise and the reality of today's NFL, the Steelers are standing at the edge of a decision that isn't about right now, it's about the next decade of Pittsburgh football. And the report makes something extremely clear. Whatever comes after Mike Tomlin must be intentional, strategic, and rooted in the same standard that has kept this organization among the league's most stable for more than half a century. That's why the tiers matter. That's why the coaching trees matter. That's why locker room presence, schematic innovation, and staff building ability are non-negotiables. Because the Steelers aren't just looking for a coach, they're looking for the next architect of a franchise. And when you dive into the full second half of the document, you see exactly why Pittsburgh is evaluating these specific names and not falling for flashy trends or short-lived success stories. Brian Flores remains the most natural fit from a cultural standpoint. His time in Pittsburgh wasn't just a footnote, it was a genuine look at how he fits inside the Steelers building. Players respected him. Veteran leaders rallied around him. His defensive approach reflects the kind of aggressive identity Pittsburgh has always loved, and the report highlights that he has matured significantly since Miami. Being around Mike Tomlin and later Kevin O'Connell reshaped his style from authoritarian to collaborative. That's a crucial evolution, especially for a team that values relationships as much as X's and O's. Add in the offensive coordinator options he could pluck from Minnesota's system, and you see why he checks every box. Robert Saleh, on the other hand, brings that raw, infectious energy that can transform a locker room instantly. The breakdown emphasizes how he survives adversity, losing stars, reshuffling talent, reinventing fronts, and still finds ways to elevate his unit. That resilience matters in Pittsburgh, a franchise that refuses to accept excuses. The real appeal, though, is his offensive network. The possibility of pairing him with someone from the Shanahan or McDaniel tree would be one of the most modern and quarterback-friendly systems the Steelers could implement. If the franchise is thinking forward, thinking evolution, thinking about giving the next quarterback every tool to succeed, Saleh becomes a compelling bridge into a new era. And then there's Nick Saban, the wild card, the outlier, the seismic possibility that would instantly redefine everything the Steelers do. The document doesn't pitch Saban as a fantasy. It breaks down the logic piece by piece. The credibility he carries, the unmatched organizational standards, the way he built staffs at Alabama filled with NFL-level developers and coordinators, the system he created, the man-match foundation that influenced modern pro defenses, and of course, the personal connection to Pittsburgh. The report paints a picture where Saban stepping into this franchise wouldn't be a gimmick, it would be a historic